Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever you're watching this. What we're going to be doing is talking about stress. So today we've got a couple of learning goals and success criteria. So our learning goals, I want you to be able to understand different strategies that we can use to handle stress. I also want you to be able to understand how using healthy habits and coping strategies can help maintain mental health and resilience in times of stress, kind of like right now. So to be successful, I want you to be able to say that I can define and identify sources and symptoms of stress. I want you to be able to tell what stress can do to people. And I'd like you to be able to identify strategies that can help us deal with situations that we can and cannot control. So what is stress? Well, stress is that thing that we feel when we're worried or we're uncomfortable about something. It's your body's response to those feelings. And what your body does when it's in those situations is it releases two different types of stress hormone. One that you probably have heard of, which is adrenaline. The other, which you probably haven't, which is cortisol. So adrenaline is a hormone that's released. It helps the fight or flight response. And what adrenaline does is it increases your heart rate. It elevates your blood pressure and boosts energy supplies. Adrenaline is the thing for that people who have an EpiPen get injected with. What that does is it gets everything kind of going. Cortisol, however, is, like I said, something that you probably haven't heard about, but it's actually the primary stress hormone. And what it does is it increases sugars or glucose in the bloodstream. It enhances your brain's use of that glucose, so it allows you to think a lot quicker. And it increases the availability of different things in your body that helps to repair tissues. So again, if you think about that fight or flight response, all of those things are really important to keep you safe. If you have to fight and you get damaged, that tissue repair is really important. If you are in a dangerous situation, your brain needs to work overtime, and so that's where that glucose comes in handy. Cortisol also helps to stop things in your body that are non-essential or that would get in the way of a fight or flight situation. So for instance, it will alter immune system responses and it suppresses the digestive system. So if you don't need those things, it'll put a pause on those. The reproductive system, obviously, you don't need that, so that goes out the window in fight or flight. And growth processes. All of those things get suppressed when cortisol is in play. It also helps to communicate with the brain regions that control mood and motivation and fear. So all of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of what stress can cause, you can kind of see that cortisol is going to be pretty important in those causes. It's a pretty main factor in those causes. So what causes stress? What causes those things? Well, again, stress is the body's response to pressure or an event or a situation. It could be a threat to a person's well-being. And when we say well-being, we're talking about a couple of things. First of all, we're talking about physical well-being, so your physical safety. So if you're walking down the sidewalk and somebody jumps out at you and threatens you, that's a threat to your well-being. But it's also sort of a perception. It's also things that will cause you to be fearful of the way that you live. So well-being is also just kind of your lifestyle. If you're used to a certain way of living and then something happens to cause a threat to that, well, that can cause a lot of stress. It's also a response to feelings that a person doesn't have enough resources to cope with different demands. So, for instance, if you want to think physical resources, if you have a job and, like I said, you have a lifestyle, but then you lose your job, well, that's that's a feeling that you don't have enough resources to maintain your lifestyle. So that's one way. It's also kind of an emotional thing. So if something happens that is emotional or that can cause emotions, like a breakup or something, stress can be caused by feeling that you don't have the ability to cope with that event. So those are kind of the main categories of causes of stress. So what are some sources of stress? Well, as you can see by the list, there's a bunch. Physical environment, for instance. Sometimes even just as simple as a noisy street, or something as a little bit more complex and more real, I guess, like an unsafe living space. Relationships are a source of stress. When you are talking with parents or siblings or boyfriend or girlfriend, those can be sources of stresses. Work or school can be a source of stress. All of those deadlines and demands that are placed on you. Different life situations. So things like financial problems or relationship breakups, or if you're having trouble at work or school, if there's an injury, if there's an illness or a death that you're dealing with, you're grieving, all of those things can cause stress. Major life changes as well are a source of stress. But the thing about stress is that it could be negative, as you can probably imagine from the ones that I just listed. But stress can also be, or sources of stress can also be from positive things. So, for instance, if you get a work promotion, you have a job and then you get promoted, well, all of a sudden you have a lot more responsibility in what you have to do. So yeah, you've got a promotion, you've got a better title, you're making more money, but with that comes a whole lot of other responsibilities. Getting married. If you know somebody who has gotten married recently or is getting married, you'll probably know that preparing for that wedding is a major source of stress. It's a happy event, but it can lead to stress. Buying a house. Hopefully in the future, you'll be in a position to do this. And again, it's very stressful because it's a lot of money that you're giving up, but you are getting something positive in return. So all of those different things can come together and create stress in our lives. It's important to note that stress is a normal part of life. Everybody experiences it. What's different, though, and this is why it's important to understand that it differs from person to person, what's different is the intensity, or how often it happens, the frequency, or how long it lasts, how long the duration of that stress. All of that's going to be different from person to person. So there's a couple of reasons why it's different from person to person. First of all, genetics. The genes that control the stress response inside of us keep most people on a steady emotional level. And depending on what your genetics are, that fight or flight response can be kind of just sort of there, or it can be really there. Overactive and underactive stress responses could stem from differences in those genes. So if you are really reactive or underreactive to that fight or flight response, that's a genetic thing. Life experiences are another reason why it can differ from person to person. Strong stress reactions can be traced to traumatic events. People who have had significant challenges in their childhood, for instance, can also be very vulnerable to stress. The same thing is true when people who have experienced violence, or they've survived an airplane or a car crash. People in the military or police officers, firefighters, people who have to deal with traumatic things as part of their job, that can increase stress as well. So what are some symptoms of stress? Well, we can look at them in three main categories: cognitive, emotional, and physical symptoms. So some symptoms can include an inability to concentrate, or thinking only negative thoughts, being anxious or having racing thoughts. Again, remember we were talking about adrenaline. The increase in glucose can cause your brain to start thinking about this. Oh, but what about this? And then this, and then this, and then this. And your thoughts you're not able to calm your thoughts down. Constant worrying can also be a symptom of stress. Feeling just generally unhappy all the time, or feeling anxious, having just being moody or irritable or even angry for longer periods of time than you would normally be, or just feeling completely overwhelmed, feeling like you've got all of the stuff that you have to deal with, and it's almost impossible. Physical symptoms could be aches and pains, nausea or dizziness, which again, when you have the release of these hormones, they're changing the chemical composition of your body. And because of that, it can cause you to be sick, or it could cause you to be dizzy. Again, with all this sugar that's rushing into your brain, that can be a whole lot of stuff to deal with. Chest pain or rapid heart rate. Again, adrenaline causes your heart to increase blood pressure and increase the heart rate. You've probably heard of stress eating. A lot of times people think stress eating is eating a lot of food, but it can also be eating not food at all. Again, cortisol suppresses that digestive system. Sleeping too much or too little. Sleep is really, really important. And if you're sleeping too much, you might think, oh, that's not a bad thing. I mean, I get to sleep in. Well, you have to think of the results of sleeping, and you're late for things, and that could be bad if you are in school, which you are, or if you have a job. And also withdrawing from others. Just being so overwhelmed that you think that, oh, I don't have time to hang out with my friends, or I don't have time to spend with my family. I have all of the stuff that I have to do. What that tends to do is it causes people to think that, oh, I can't spend time with people, so they withdraw. So up to now, it's kind of been like stress. It's mostly a bad thing. Again, sometimes it can be good because it can be motivating, but mostly it's a bad thing, and bad things happen to it. So how do we deal with it? How can we take that stress and do things about it? Well, last time we were talking about positive mental health, and this is where we have to take some strategies from positive mental health. So the first thing that we need to do is identify the source of that stress. We have to figure out and sit down and think, okay, what is causing me to feel stressed? Coping with stress means that we have to identify those situations that might happen. And then we think of the strategies that we're going to talk about, um, and try and figure out which one would be best to help us deal with this stress. So, we also have to realize that some events, sometimes the things that are stressing us out, are just out of our control. We can't really do anything about it. But when we have those strategies, we can implement them, we can use them to help us deal with that stress. And even if there's a situation that we can't control, these strategies will help us not feel stressed out by it. So there are some strategies that we can use, and you can see them in the list that I've made here. The first one is don't overschedule. So one of the things that we need to do is take time out of our day to relax and enjoy moments of no activities, just doing nothing, or doing something that's not productive. Um, when we overschedule, what that means is we're having too many things or too many events planned or scheduled that we have to deal with. So if we actually take some time to think about what it is that we're doing and not overschedule, then we can start to kind of make ourselves less stressed. And that leads us into our second strategy that we can use, and that's to make time for exercise and play. So again, sometimes we just need to remove ourselves from that stressful situation. We just need to say to ourselves, all right, stop working time. Now it's time to do some exercise, or now it's time to go and play. And when I say play, I don't mean, okay, well, let's drop everything and let's pick up a video game. I mean, certainly you can do that, but exercise is also very important. Exercise is really important for ourselves because what it helps to do is it helps to clear up some of those stressful feelings. It helps there are chemicals that happen or that are in our bodies when we get stress. And what exercise does is it releases a different type of chemical to remove those stressful feelings. So exercise is actually a really good thing. Um, Getting outside, getting fresh air, super, super important. And we have to make sure that we make time for that. Another thing is to get enough sleep. Sleep is really important for our bodies. Sleep can help our minds recharge. And literally, what happens when we're asleep is our body sort of shuts down a little bit, and it gives our brains some time to clear out all the junk, to clear out all of the stress, all of those chemicals that I was saying that help to, or that are caused by stress. Sleep helps get rid of that. So when we get a really good night's sleep, we awake refreshed, relaxed, and ready to take on those things that might cause us stress during the day. Another thing, and this is super important as well, is we need to accept that there are going to be things that are outside of our control. There's nothing we can do about those things. We can't prevent those things from happening. What we can do, though, is deal with it in our own way. We have to realize that, okay, this thing happened. There's no way I could have prevented it. There's no way I can stop it from happening. So it's going to happen, and I can't control that. But what I can control is how I respond to it. So that's really important to understand as well. Going back to the first thing that we talked about this year in health, making sure that you eat healthy, well-balanced meals. Um, Eating healthy and giving our bodies the nutrients it need can, again, just like sleep, help our minds to recharge and deal with the challenges that we might face during the day. Lastly, and this kind of goes back to the first thing that we were talking about here, is reflect on your feelings. So understanding what the source of stress is, reflecting on that is important, but equally as important is to figure out what you're feeling about it. So you have to check in with how you're feeling. And that's another way to identify when you're feeling stressed or worried. And then you can deal with those feelings as they're happening rather than having them kind of just linger and sit there for a while. If you can deal with those feelings, those negative feelings, by reflecting and figuring out what's causing them and how to deal with them, then they won't last. So that is stress.